sunk. Their records show that on one day alone, the 8th of August 1914, Germany lost 41 ships. Neutral countries, Holland, Denmark, Sweden, were not spared. Germany depended on ports like Rotterdam for grain and raw materials, so Britain forced neutral ships to submit to the blockade. Starting with Holland, the British pressured shipping companies into declaring their goods. In every country, she built up a network of agents. They tracked ships coming and going, who was sending what, where. Any ship could be stopped. Any found with banned supplies for Germany had its cargo seized. Within weeks, the German government started to ration food. Caroline Ethel Cooper was an Australian stranded in Leipzig since the start of the war. Every week, she wrote to her sister in Adelaide.
My dear Emmy, the government has seized the whole bread, flour and meal supply of the country. We are allowed only 4 pounds of bread and can only buy 1 pound of white flour at a time. Now that the war against neutral ships and food supply has begun, prices rise every week.
Sailors like Richard Stumpf were stuck in harbour, frustrated and hungry.
2nd of April 1916. We spend most of our time worrying about our bellies. Even the officers are embittered and dissatisfied.
To end Germany's isolation, her navy came up with a revolutionary plan. An unarmed submarine over 200 feet long that could carry a cargo of 1,000 tons. In June 1916, the Deutschland set out for America, the first time a submarine had ever tried to cross the Atlantic.
Because of the wet weather and the high-running seas, the deck hatches were closed most of the time. The diesel engines pumped hot, humid air throughout the boat. Sweat ran down the bulkheads, and water leaked around loose rivets. The drinking water tasted like diesel. And every meal the cook cooked had a layer of oil across the top. As we approached the American coast, Captain Koenig ordered the crew to say nothing to anyone about the strains we'd undergone during the trip, and to especially avoid mentioning our seasickness.
Now, after 2 world wars, it's taken for granted that America and Britain are the closest of allies, naturally on the same side. But in the First World War, it wasn't so clear. "8 million Americans had German parents or grandparents. 4.5 million were of Irish descent. Many of them had little love for England. At the outbreak of war, thousands of US citizens had tried to enlist in the German army. And America was enjoying a massive economic boom. Half Britain's war budget was spent in the States. Companies like Bethlehem Steel were swamped with orders. They hauled in 6 times the profits they'd made before the war. The Deutschland was just another good customer. Her brave Atlantic crossing, dodging Royal Navy warships, became a rallying point for anyone who had suffered from the British blockade.
Our crossing gradually became a triumph. All the neutral steamers we met, American or others, greeted us with 3 hoots or with their sirens. Only an English steamer sailed past in deadly silence, while we were proudly raising the black, white and red flag in the wind.
The Deutschland's crew received a hero's welcome. There were dinners in their honor. Captain Koenig was invited to meet the president.
The 3 weeks we spent in the United States were a non-stop party. Everywhere we went, people gathered round us. They all wanted a souvenir of some kind. I even sold the buttons off my shirt and the stripes off my tunic. German families introduced us to their daughters, and we never had to pay for beer.
The Deutschland returned to Germany with a vital cargo of nickel and rubber. The help it gave the economy was nothing compared with the boost to German morale, as even Caroline Ethel Cooper had to admit.
The town is flagged today because the Deutschlanders got safely back. The sight of those red, white and black flags always makes me sick. But I'm glad she got across all the same. It was a sporting run.
But the Deutschland was too small to break the blockade. In Germany and Austria, there were not enough people to work the land, and too many officials trying to ration what food there was.
The situation with the hunger and queues is turning nasty. People wait for potatoes in their hundreds, 4 deep, from 4 in the morning until the afternoon. Every morning there are queues lined with armchairs and cushions upon which people sit and sleep.
The shortages worsened after the terrible harvest of 1916. The Germans called it the turnip winter. Many had nothing to eat but cattle fodder. There were 50 food riots that year.
Oh, what days of terror. Everything's in turmoil. There was havoc in town last night. The window panes were smashed in at Café Kaiserhof. Angry crowds were shouting outside bakeries and inns. Up at the castle, they cursed the Major in words I shan't repeat. The army appeared at 11.
It's horribly cold, and because the rolling stock has all been taken for the war effort, there is an extreme shortage of coal. We're learning how to be freezing, which isn't the most pleasant feeling. Schools, theatres and cinemas have all been closed until further notice because of the lack of coal.
The German Navy did nothing to help.
Even if large parts of our battle fleet were lying at the bottom of the sea, it would have accomplished more than it does now, lying well preserved in our ports.
At Wilhelmshaven, people wrote graffiti on the walls.
Dear Fatherland, you may rest assured. The fleet's in harbour, safely moored.
Admiral Reinhard Scheer had been ordered not to risk his ships against the full British fleet. But by mid-1916, the pressure to do something was intense. On the 31st of May, Germany's high seas fleet steamed out of Wilhelmshaven, hoping to engage the Royal Navy's battle cruisers. But the British were one jump ahead. The men in room 40 had already decoded Scheer's orders. 3 hours before the Germans had even left harbour, the entire British Grand Fleet was on its way to intercept them. Now the world would get the great sea battle it had been waiting for, Jutland. It was a titanic clash. 250 warships, 100,000 men. Britain's first great fleet action since Trafalgar. It was a fight they had to win. If Germany ended up masters of the North Sea, the blockade would be finished, the British Army in Europe cut off, Britain herself open to invasion. Admiral John Jellicoe was, Winston Churchill said, the only man who could lose the war in an afternoon. Less well armoured than Germany's, Britain's ships preferred to fight at very long range. But at Jutland, the range was just 5 miles.
We fired very slowly, with deliberation, while the Kaiser-class ships in front of us shot like mad. Now the English were in an unfavourable position.
Our first shot hit the bridge of a German destroyer and blew it to hell. Shells fell all around us, and what with ships sinking and dying and dead bodies floating about, it made one shiver at the sight of it.
At 4:30 p.m., the battlecruiser Queen Mary was hit by a shell which exploded in the ship's magazine.
A horrible sight it was. First, an enormous height of dull red flame, followed by a great mass of black smoke, amongst which was the wreckage thrown in all directions. The blast was tremendous.
Admiral Beatty watched from HMS Lion.
There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today.
About 7 o'clock, we passed the wreck of a large ship, which at that time we hoped was a German, but later learned was one of ours. She was broken right in two. The bow and stern were sticking up about 50 feet and quite independent.
But the British had the Germans outgunned and outnumbered. As evening fell, the German fleet broke off the action.
We were in a regular death trap. There was only one way to escape the unfavorable tactical situation. Turn the line about and withdraw on the opposite course. We had to get out of this dangerous enemy envelopment.
To silent Jack Jellicoe, peering through the fog of battle, it didn't look as though the Germans were running for home, but lulling the British into a trap.
If the enemy battle fleet were to turn away from an advancing fleet, I should assume that the intention was to lead us over mines and submarines.
So Jellicoe ordered the British to turn as well, away from their vulnerable foe. As night fell on the 31st of May 1916, the men in Room 40 tracked the retreating German fleet. They passed its positions on to the Royal Navy, giving Jellicoe a last chance to finish the Germans off. But the Royal Navy failed to catch them, and the German fleet made it home.
During the night, telegrams arrived giving the estimated losses of the English, which are 2 to 3 in our favor. The Kaiser was therefore able to announce at breakfast, "We have won a great victory in the North Sea."
Based on the maths alone, the Kaiser was right. Germany had lost 11 ships and 2,500 men. Britain 14 ships and 6,000 men. But that wasn't the point. The Kaiser's battleships were back in harbour and stayed there till the end of the war. The British fleet still ruled the North Sea, ever more tightening the blockade. From the start, Germany had replied to the British blockade with her own economic war. She too tried to cripple the enemy by cutting off supplies. This light raider, the Merva, was one of the few surface ships Germany ever sent into the North Sea. Her target, not warships but cargo boats. She sunk 20,000 tons, building a large collection of captured crews.